This is just epic. I don't know how else to start other than that. So Pete Buttigieg went on to Flagrant, which is the podcast of Andrew Schulz, who's a comedian, and who, like so many of these sort of comedian bros, aligned himself with Maga during the 2024 campaign. And one of the things that a deal was made of, correctly so, after in the post-op of the Harris loss and Trump tragically winning, was, could it have been, among many other factors that I've analyzed, at least a big contributing factor, that these influential podcasters who aren't overtly doing, like I do, a political commentary podcast, they're just talking about all sorts of things, and then politics came up, and Vance would go on there and talk for 3 hours, Trump would go on there, and they would just hang out. And it wasn't like, when articulating their support for Trump, which swayed some of those key male voters that ended up swinging the election, it wasn't like they would say, here are the top 5 policy issues, here's the difference between Kamala and Donald. Instead, it was a vibes-based thing. Many of them will admit that. Even in this podcast, you'll hear what I'm talking about. And so I think what's profound as we go through these clips, as Buttigieg kind of wins these guys over, is the power of a conversation. Good communicators for the Democratic Party could really make a huge difference just by showing up and sitting down and getting past this idea that you have to be triple focus grouped and talking pointed out of your ears and then go on for a 5-minute hit on a mainstream media outlet where you stick to those talking points. And maybe we learn from the fact that this is where people are getting, a lot of their political persuasions. And so show the up. And then if you're a politician who can't do that, maybe you're not the right person for this moment, because this is where people are listening. So let's listen to these clips. I have a lot. It's going to be kind of a deep dive, because from this 3-hour conversation, there's so many clips that I want to show you. But again, Pete Buttigieg talking on Andrew Schulz's podcast with some other guys. Here we go.
Talked about.
Sure. And we should come back to that. But I think if you look at the actual conservative governing plan, though, not the talk, not the campaigning, not the posturing, what they actually do.
Okay.
I would say the biggest social policy commitment that they've made, that they actually care about to the point that they actually went through and kept it, was to get rid of the right to choose. Number one project of the Republican Party on the social side.
Yeah.
It's one of the few promises they actually kept.
Yeah, that's valid, yeah.
And then economically, the biggest promise they've actually kept is tax cuts for the rich. Biggest thing that he did in his first term. And right now, it's up for debate right now. Literally, Congress it's not getting as much attention because all the other crazy things going on. But it's more tax cuts for the rich and for corporations, right? So to me, like, most of the stuff he said he was going to do, he didn't actually do. He didn't do the big infrastructure bill he talked about. We actually did it. He didn't even build the wall. That's the thing. Build the wall was like a galvanizing statement. It's not like he actually did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying to you.
2% of it. But I want to do something we actually follow through on, right? A galvanizing statement that's all bullshit is not good enough.
Give me something.
I think what I'm saying is he's being hyperbolic. I can try to break it.
No, I'm not. I'm being dead serious.
Speak to people at an emotional level, even if it's not realistic.
Okay, so
And I'll stop that there. All of these, I feel bad, just so you know, some of this will feel like I'm cutting it short. It's because there's so many different topics I want to get to, but this is super important from Pete Buttigieg. I've said it so many times, but it's just not sexy. It's not sexy when you say it this way, which is why we need to figure out the messaging, even though it's weird that Andrew Schulz will go on to say, if at least lie to me and have a good, strong, evocative message, slogan, and a thing that you're going to do that I can, even if you don't end up doing it, which is a strange thing to say, but policy, right? I've always said that. Please, we get all focused on all these different things and these debates and we hate each other. But if you just look at the policy, even the guys admit there, even though they were way more supportive of Trump during the campaign, at least Schulz was, I can't speak for every one of those. I'm not super familiar with the podcast, but a lot of these Rogan adjacent comedians, right? They all kind of got in the same space, supported Trump. And it was not strictly policy. It was actually policy exclusive. It felt at many points in time. And if you look past these really provocative debates that we have and focus on policy, you do see that while both parties are wildly broken, it is the Republican Party that whatever criticisms you have of the Democratic Party, you have tenfold of the Republican Party. And their policy record, if you look just zooming out a little bit, is on a social issue that they really followed through on, it's the taking away of reproductive rights. But then on the economic side, all they seem to do is oversee worse economies and give more tax cuts to wealthy folks. Again, at a really zoomed out analysis. And Pete Buttigieg bringing that into this arena hopefully gets people thinking. But then Schultz's reaction is interesting, which is, all right, how do you turn, as he's going to go, Buttigieg will, through in his show a couple times, nice, very thoughtful policy articulations into sexy slogans and simplified. And that's not insulting to anyone. People are living busy lives and they need a quick and feeling-based message. So how do you solidify what is a little bit cerebral and nitty-gritty into something that people can really feel motivated behind? Now, I'm disappointed people couldn't get more motivated behind the strict policy, but that's life. Maybe I should stop resenting the way things are and accept them and adapt. Here's Buttigieg, a clip that's now going viral of him just simplifying. All right, here's what, when I am fighting for things, here's what I want. Here's what the ultimate ideal outcome would be for every American family.
I want you to be able to get up in the morning, and the first thing you do is you commute to work, and by the way, if you're on an EV, I want that to be affordable for you, or if you're on public transit, not to get back into the subway situation, but I want you to have good public transit to get to where you're going. And then when you get to that job, I want you to be paid well. And if you're about to have a kid, I want you to know that you're going to have parental leave when you have that kid. And if you don't want to have a kid, I want you to have the right to choose whether to have a kid, which means access to birth control and abortion, and those things that give you the freedom to decide on that. And if you already have a kid, when you pick them up at school, I want that school to be good, not having its funding slashed while they set fire to the Department of Education. And then when you get home, I want you to be in a neighborhood that is safe and where you can breathe the air, because we didn't let them get rid of the Clean Air Act. And you don't have to think for one moment about whether the air you breathe or the water you drink is clean and clear, which actually takes a lot, because it means the government has to constrain those actors that would make you unfree by polluting the air and polluting the water. And then when you go to bed, I want you to know that your family's going to be fine, even if it's family like mine, despite there being some Supreme Court justice who wants to obliterate your family because it doesn't match his interpretation of his religion. Like, that's the life I want everybody to be able to live.
Yeah, I think
we can deliver that.
That's fun.
They say cut that into an ad, that clip. And again, I think sometimes the world is simpler in our mind if we prescribe maliciousness where it doesn't belong. And I'm totally willing to say, and say it a lot, there is a huge contingent of the country, you're not going to reach them, all right? They don't care. I do want your family to be obliterated, right? But that's not who's making the difference in these elections. That's not why that part is a contingent, but the influenceable contingent of why Trump won the election, those people can be reaching. You're hearing it there. On abortion, they're going, yeah. On gay rights, they're going, yeah. And that's not, those issues aren't why they swung for Trump. And so those people, and I saw the comments of this podcast, it most likely, vast majority male viewers, we're going, gosh, this Pete Buttigieg guy. And there's such a simple thing that you don't hear Democrats do enough, which is, here's what I'm fighting for. Let me paint you a picture. And it's all right. It takes away the controversy a little bit. And for the people sitting on the couches around him, it puts into perspective, why are we investing in green energy, for example? And then he cites the clean air, clean water, and that's actually something that he's fighting for. What are the ways that we invest properly in public safety? It doesn't require the draconian policies of Trump to, as we saw a lot of progress during the Biden years, make people safer. And then other things will be cited as well. And that's running parallel to an agenda that is just exacerbating the oligarchy and nobody. We even saw Rogan recently say, when Bernie says the oligarchy shouldn't have so much power, I think he's kind of right, even with Rogan's MAGA-ness. So there's a message there. And there are people there. I think what's hopeful about this moment is not that we're in it, it sucks, but that I do see the light at the end of the tunnel and the fact that America can be better if we give them opportunity to be. Here's more. By the way, click the subscribe button if you appreciate my breakdowns of stuff like this.
If, on the other hand, we point to the fact that, like, Boston is at something like a 70-year low in the murder rate there. Or we point to the achievements in Denver under their mayor there about tackling some of the hardest problems in the world, like homelessness and housing. And having lived that as a mayor in a largely low-income community, like that is one of the hardest things that people working in government can ever try to solve, right? And there are people who are doing it well, and most of those people, in my experience, are Democrats. Now, they may not be like Washington Democrats or like federal, like congressional part of our party, but because I think the folks who are saying like government got this wrong, which might be true any number of times, what they're really saying is like the policies of this person in government got it wrong, but they don't have an answer. Their answer is burn it all down, right? If we haven't solved poverty, their answer is we're going to slash Medicaid. Which is what the Republican budget moving through Congress right now will do, is slash Medicaid. Medicaid may not be perfect. In fact, I know for a fact, like many issues come up in the way it's administered, the way people have access to it. But I also know for a fact that if your answer to that is just to cut out a bunch of poor people, or VA, like any veteran can tell you, the horror stories of all the times things didn't go right in dealing with the VA. But if you think the answer is to just cut it or privatize it, that's not an answer.
Right.
And you can see in the face of Andrew throughout this whole podcast, and this is a really big, popular now category of content, which is people who, and sometimes this gets you into problematic territory because they'll bring on someone who's very practiced at being deceitful, and their sort of I just listen, gab it up method lends itself to the spreading of harmful ideas without any pushback. Again, sometimes they freak out when people say that. You have every right to do that. I'm just saying I'm going to have, which is my right, a little bit of criticism for handling interviews that way. But that I'm open to listening. Here, I do want to credit it. You can see it's kind of, there's a winning over happening, because what the right has been so effective in branding liberals as, some because of little kernels of truth, some because of utter fabrications, some because of how the social media algorithm and rising to the top the most extreme voices, that maybe the Andrew Schulz of the world and many others have been misled by that. But I do want to know, as we're going through this, it's not just messaging. Now, there's no compelling argument that Trump's going to be better for the working class than Vice President Harris would have been. Zero, zip, none. Okay. So it's not to say that the policy isn't so drastically different that the logical choice for America would have been to have made Harris president. But it is to say a combination of Democrats not being aggressive enough in implementing change-oriented policies, thus making people feel like they're pro-status quo, then Trump duping people into making them believe that he's the one who's going to overturn the status quo, and flawed messaging, like how there were a lot of accomplishments in the Biden years, but clearly those weren't able to be articulated properly, has brought us to the moment that we are now, which is why we need someone who can both be serious about wanting to implement real generational change and also be able to articulate the why, the when, and the what.
Such as Doge, dude.
If Doge was actually about government efficiency,
Yeah.
I'd be all for it.
But it's not about that.
No.
What is it about?
It's about power. Look, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Because
You telling me people in government are concerned with power?
I know. It's shocking.
Insane.
I know. Hot take.
Truth bombs
Hot take.
being dropped on flagrant.
No, but look at it this way. And yeah, when I was in government in the South, like as mayor, when I had my kind of small government that I was running, we like took whole departments apart and put them back together. We removed people who weren't performing very well. And by the way, that was hard. Like one of the reasons I've always had a problem with this president is like he emerged kind of play acting, like firing people for fun, right? It was like his taglines, "You're fired." For me, at least, as like a young like CEO basically of a city government, other than dealing with violence and death, the worst part of my job was firing people. Like I hated it, especially because like it wasn't necessarily a bad person, but you had a person who was in a role that they didn't fit in, and their department wasn't doing as well as I thought it needed to do to serve residents. I would have this very painful conversation where we'd sit down, I'd look them in the eye, and that sucked for obviously most of all for them. But anyway, we were not afraid to do that because you have to do that.
Yeah.
But look at what happened when they came in, right? If this was actually about government efficiency, then the problem you would be solving, which is a real problem, is that in the federal government, it is too hard to reward your top performers. So you could be somebody who could be commanding a multi-million-dollar salary in the private sector, working on something wildly important, but there's just no way that you're getting, you're in your particular pay grade, same as everybody else. And to remove your bottom
lowest.
performers.
Yeah,
like a lot of people who've been in and out of business and government will tell me, like when I was in the private sector and the public sector, actually, like the top 10% were pretty much the same. These amazing driven people. The government ones weren't compensated as well, but they were purpose driven. But the bottom 10% was completely different because I couldn't do anything about the bottom 10%.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine if Doge had come in and they had gone through every department and said, okay, we're going to create a way to reward the top performers. And we're also going to analyze either whose job description is no longer needed or their job performance is not there. Mm-hmm. And even though it's painful, even though maybe it's politically tough, like we're going to show them the door.
Yeah.
That would be one thing. But they just sent an email to everybody.
Yeah.
Many of whom were in fact top performers. Yeah. Like some of the people they fired who got caught up in this thing, the people got fired just based on whether you were in a category called probationary employee. But to be clear, probationary isn't like you fucked up and you're on probation.
Yeah, you could
Often,
start. Yeah,
you could actually be because you were promoted.
Yeah,
you could be a 7-year veteran at the FAA, or maybe you'd been there as a contractor, but you were so good that the FAA said, "We want to hire you now as a government employee." Yeah. And even though it might have been a little pay cut, you went for it.
Yeah,
and you're probationary.
Yeah,
and then next thing you know, like you wake up one day and this.
Yeah, and this is something that Pete hit multiple times on multiple topics throughout this podcast, which is sometimes the stated goal of something from Trump or from Maga is something everyone agrees with, like, let's make the government more efficient. Yeah, awesome, right? But then they go about it in a way that's completely catastrophic. Like it actually becomes, he said, it's not about efficiency, it's about power. I think the best example is if this were about efficiency, why were they targeting and going after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? That's just emboldening the people who defraud and have the power to get away with it, the Elons of the world. And it's weakening everyday consumers who need that protection. Why was the NLRB being kneecapped that protects workers' rights? Why did they just get rid of, without congressional approval, USAID? These things aren't about efficiency, but in some cases directly benefited Elon or people like him. And so I think what's important to win people over and to come off as intellectually honest and to be intellectually honest is to acknowledge where the stated goal is totally great. And it was like the application of it was completely haphazard and disastrous. Tariffs, similarly, wanting to strengthen the U.S. working class and create a manufacturing boom, awesome. Isolationism and the completely crazy approach to tariff that Trump has brought forward is not the way to do that. And I think when you do that, then people go, okay, well, I cared about this thing, but maybe I'm misdirecting my prescription. We all agree on what the problem is, but what we prescribe to be the best way to address the problem. Maybe I could be convinced to a different argument on that. Here's more.
We all agree that there's money being wasted in government, and we were for the idea of Doge, but you said they're only doing it for power. How is what they're doing for power? Because it seems like they're just focusing on cutting down expenditures so they have something that can be like, look, we saved all this money. Right. But how is it a power play?
Because it makes everything, because they're not going through the regular, like any kind of process where you have to like check with Congress or evaluate which of the programs are actually doing something and which ones aren't, or which people are good at their jobs and which aren't. It means all that really matters is whether you're on the White House's good side. And
so if you're on the White House's good side, it sends a message basically, be on our good side, we won't clip your program. That is one way of interpreting it, for sure.
Yeah. And they're doing this with everything. The tariffs are like this.
Of course.
Right? In the end, if your company or your country or your industry gets on his good side, then you get out. That has nothing to do with whether it's good economic policy or whether it's going to help, my neighbors in Michigan, but it is something that helps consolidate power, right? Law firms. He's sending this message like, if your law firm doesn't get on my good side, then you're going to be screwed, because we're going to use, even though it's completely illegal, we're going to...
That's the other thing I meant to mention about when he was bringing up Medicaid and some of these other things, acknowledging where there are problems. Not just, your stated goal is great, because I think I've met people who genuinely think the argument is we don't want more efficiency or we don't want to address when there's fraud. It's just, that's not the argument, obviously. So then going like he did, hey, I'm not saying there's not problems with Medicaid or the VA, but pay attention, because it's really, really easy to acknowledge the problem. Pay attention to what the proposed solutions are. Often because this is a long-standing ideological stance, their belief, to oversimplify it, is destroy the government, dismantle the government, and that's the solution. If you think destroying Medicaid as a solution for the problems with Medicaid, then side with them. If you think addressing those problems while making better than ever a program like Medicaid or any other government program, then maybe you are choosing the wrong side. Here's this.
It's like any form of diplomacy. Like, you do shots across the bow. You make clear what if you do this, we're going to respond that way, and there has to be some like logic to it or order to it if you want to shape the behavior of other countries, right? And what we're seeing instead is this like really like chaotic, like grab ass policy where like he changes his mind every couple of days on things, right? And that makes it that much harder, especially if you're a small business, or if you're a giant corporation. You have all kinds of hedges and like ways you can maneuver through this.
Or they'll just remove the tariffs. That was another thing that really frustrated me. If you're going to put the tariffs on, put them on everything.
Seems to me like hold it.
Yeah,
right, now they're like picking and choosing what they're going to apply.
Yeah, so now Apple doesn't have the tariffs, and it's just like. But to me, that frustrated because Apple is the one that should be paying more than anybody. They're the one that parks their money overseas. They're the one that's skirting the taxes.
So you can see some really important realizations there. Like if this was a genuine attempt by Trump that he believed in through the tariff plan to benefit the working class, why is he doing it so disjointedly, disorientedly, discombobulatedly? Why is he doing it that way? And then musing about exceptions for companies who are his rich buddies. That doesn't. If anyone's going to need an exception, why wouldn't it be the small businesses who don't have the type of profits that these bigger companies do? And then we'll close on just a really, oh, Luke, you're so sensitive clip that got me a little bit of wetness in my eyes.
Right around the time I came out, right?
This was after you got back from Afghanistan.
Yeah, exactly. When you get deployed, they tell you to write a letter. I still have it in a drawer somewhere. It just says just in case on the outside.
Wow.
And it's everything from that you want your loved ones to know, from your internet passwords to like how you feel your life went. So I got deployed while I was in office, and I just took a leave, stopped being mayor, started being lieutenant, and went into my other job, basically. I was a sitting mayor of my hometown. I had a beautiful house. I had good friends. I had like a good life. And that was part of what I wrote about in that letter. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, all right, but I'm a grown-ass man, and I don't actually know what it's like to be in love. And if I get back, I'm not going to let that continue. Like, whatever the implications, I'd rather deal with that than once again contemplate the idea that I could go to my grave not knowing what it's like to be in love.
Whew, heavy. So takeaway, this is so needed. I think the other thing it does too, especially for someone like people like Trump goes and does these long podcasts, he's not hearing what they're saying and not able to retain it probably as Pete Buttigieg could, where in more and more of these contexts, you end up picking up on what it is that people care about, what their issues are. And I think he could end up refining even further what is already a pretty strong message that he brings, and then be able to do it. And just people are getting tired of the
right around the time I came out, right?
As I'm playing that clip again, the sort of robotic politician. And I find it absurd that Trump being unfiltered can win people over when what he's being unfiltered about is unfiltered lies. Like, he's not being transparently honest. He's being transparently deceitful and authoritarian and all these things, right? But one of the contributors to his success was people perceived him as not a typical politician. And so if you watch, and I encourage you to, if you have the time, the full podcast here, you notice it's just a more casual environment. And Pete Buttigieg is able to just talk and swear and laugh and joke. And that's what a lot of people are now using as their barometer. Again, I want to say, I don't think that's the best way to engage with politics, is to go off of just vibes. Who do you like? Who speaks the most nicely? And who comes off as a guy you get a beer with? Like, I don't think that's how we should decide, but a lot of people do. And I get why. And with that in mind, more of this is what I think we're going to need to see if MAGA is to be defeated in the future. Share your thoughts in the comments. A lot of fascinating stuff there.